Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Masha Mikanovsky, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back. In today's episode, Michelle and I are excited to speak with product leader and fellow podcaster Ross Webb about a way to measure the success of product teams called the Product Team Success Scorecard. Let's dive in. How are you, Ross?
Hey, doing great, Matt and Moshe. Great to be with you. Moshe, we've been talking about getting on a podcast, I think, for over a year. So fantastic to be on here. Looking forward to having you guys, both of you, on mine as well.
Yeah, and welcome. Hi, Matt. Welcome, Ross, to the show. And yes, we've been talking on LinkedIn for some time now, and you've been busy also, I believe, with Product MBA with Henry, which Henry led.
Oh, okay.
Which
he's
was
been on the show a couple
show.
times. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that's how I met you, Ross, through Henry. So I'm always grateful for this podcast because we get to meet so many great people through the network. So let's dive in. Start first with tell us about yourself. Who is Ross?
Sure, thanks so much for that. And I'm glad that you mentioned Henry because I think that's where a lot of my passion and my heart is in product management. You know, Henry and I created something called the Prod Career Accelerator because I was seeing a lot of product people really stifled and blocked in their career paths. And I've always felt that like I've been super blessed in my career and I wanted to give back. And it was just amazing. You know, we had people one guy was struggling to get a role for about 11 months. And by the time he had finished our course, you know, he'd gotten 3 roles. And I'm not trying to promote the course because Henry and I don't have time to do that anymore. I'm not trying to pitch anything. But, you know, where I am in product, at least in my life, you know, I've been blessed to work with a lot of small companies, large companies, as large as Amazon, where I've been blessed enough to be a principal and managed, you know, being on the product leadership teams there. And also smaller startups. Where I am in product tends to be on the enterprise side, you know, because I find that like whether it's LinkedIn or podcasts, wherever you say something, it's got to be like, here's the caveat that it probably won't work if you're like a 3-person startup or vice versa. What works in a startup might not work in a 1.5 million person company like Amazon. Mm-hmm. You know, loads of different problems there. Yeah, I've been blessed to work with a lot of great people in product, go-to-market. I love go-to-market. And I also love tools, which is why I love your guys' podcast because I'm a tool geek at the end of the day. I'm like, I'll get into somewhere where that like I've been in large government organizations like it's like the Ministry of Justice here, which is massive. And it's like, okay, we need product plan, we need this, we need that. Let's get going. You know, let's get our tooling right. And a lot of that led me to, you know, some of the discoveries I've made along the years and some of the frameworks and tools that I've created myself. Because, you know, as a product guy, it's always like I love building stuff, whether that's a scorecard, a template, a dashboard, a product, whatever. It's just like, you know, let's make stuff. So that's pretty much where my head is at. And I just love seeing other people in product succeed. And that's where my passion lies.
I love that term, tool geek. I don't think I guess I'm a geek as well, but
yeah, we are. Let's admit it. We'll admit it. It's a safe space. We're good.
Yeah, usually when I think about geeks, I think about, you know, people that are playing games, and I was never into gaming and stuff like that. So that to me is geeks. But yeah, I guess I am a bit of a geek.
We love to use new tools. You know, you get into new tools and you get to see how other people build product. I think that's part of it.
Yes.
And you get to see how their take on it is and things that you like about it and things you don't like about it. So yeah, I'm always geeking out with new stuff. So
yeah, it's funny. I was in Collision recently in the show here in Toronto, and my colleague, he was so tired after 3 days because you see millions of people and millions of tools and stuff like that. But I was like the Duracell bunny because I was going from one place to another place and see their tools and stuff like that. So really, I'm energized by seeing the tools. So glad to be in that club, Ross.
Yes.
So,
Fantastic.
so let's talk about the product team success scorecard, and I think it evolved over time, and you called it something else previously, and you talked about it in different places in Mind the Product, I believe, and we can put the link to that in the description to some of your talks from the past. But tell us first of all, what is it?
Sure. Let me describe the problem that it fixes or tries to fix. So
Of course.
if your listeners just have this problem, please keep listening, and we'll get to the solution. And in product leadership, and this isn't just a product leadership problem, it affects everybody. But I work a lot with product leaders, or as a product leader myself, and I tend to encounter two problems. And the one problem is with my colleagues in the C-suite. If you've got a CTO, CMO, let's just call them the C-suite for now, they don't understand and they don't get product the majority of the time. And again, I'm talking enterprise here. I'm not talking a 15-person startup in Silicon Valley where the founders, if they're founder-led, they probably do get it. So I just want to kind of make that caveat really quickly. But if you're in an enterprise and your two problems are, one is your peers don't get product, they don't understand it. And even if they do understand it, they're not quite sure how to measure it, So the problem there becomes they will then just default back to delivery. Like, product is really good because we knocked it out of the park on time this time. Or product's really bad because they were delayed by 3 weeks, whatever, right? If they don't have other better metrics that you can put in front of them, they'll default back to what they're not. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the second problem, and I think a lot of your listeners are going to face this, is they'll feel like they work in a feature factory, right? Because if your peers as a product leader don't get products, and if they default back to product delivery, that's going to go down all the way down the chain to, let's say, an associate product manager that feels, all I'm doing is writing stories, and my engineering partners are just saying, just feed me stories, which means, hey, it never got fixed up the line. And there's a lot of things happening, I'd say, for example, like in the product ops space, that are trying to fix this problem. But if you haven't got the problem brought in at the leadership level, tooling, ops are not going to fix a fundamental problem. Unfortunately, what I'm trying to evangelize is, even if you're not a product leader, you need to know about the tool to fix it, so you can educate your manager and help them fix the problems that they've got. So again, if I can just set the context, I remember I once was, I was a product leader. I was actually hired as a product coach, and this was back in, I think, 2019. So this was pretty early as far as product coaching. And by the way, I'm not a product coach. I don't go out there. There's dozens and dozens, I think, of product coaches out there now. Back in 2019, that wasn't the case. But this is a specific contract for the world's largest market research firm. And I'm not going to mention them by name, but I was brought in where their head of, to give you the example, they were a company that on Friday, they were all project managers. On Monday, they were all product managers, right? Give or take a couple of days, but that was pretty much it. Their head of projects, who was now their head of product, she came to me and she was like, how do I manage these people? Like, how do I manage product managers? How do I know what are the inputs? And I'm not just talking how do I manage them from a job description, like, your quarterly job performance reviews and rec reviews and all that kind of stuff. It's more like, what are the inputs that actually go into make a great product team? How does that relate to like our company values or leadership principles and things like that? And then how do I measure that, and how do I know that that's actually getting progressing going forward? Which I thought was a fantastic conversation, because I was in some hiring interviews with him, hiring some product managers. And then I was like, look, I was just about to mention the name, which one to? I was like, hey, actually, you know what, Catherine, because I love it. I think she's fantastic. I was like, Catherine, I'll sort that out. And that became the first iteration in my interactions with her on the product team success scorecard. And I've been iterating that, and I can talk to you a little bit about results and what that means, even to the level that when I got hired at Amazon as a principal, it was, hey, Ross, what we need you to do as a product leader is we need to put your product team success scorecard in place. Because, again, our engineering partners, our business partners, they don't know how to measure product outside of delivery. So, again, just long-winded answer. But, again, if you're a 5-10 person startup, you probably don't need a scorecard to measure how product's there. If you're a a larger org moving towards enterprise, even if you're in a commercial space of a couple hundred people, you absolutely need this to solve those two problems. One, your C-suite partners need to get products, and this is the way to do that. And secondly, your team need to know that they're not working in a feature factory, and it solves both of those problems.
Mm-hmm. And that is definitely a big problem that I've seen also in many places. I've been working in an organization that there were not maybe thousands and thousands of people, but even 400, 500, 600 people will have that situation because they are in that enterprise mindset. So it's definitely something that I struggled with in the past, to get the management to understand how things are working. I definitely see the need there, and I'm sure many other people see the need. And you said like companies, startups in Silicon Valley don't really might not need it or whatever. Probably most of the companies in the world are not like companies in the Silicon Valley or startups in other places. So I would say that many companies do need, to understand how they manage product managers. Cool. So what are the components of the success scorecard? Can you break it down to us in some simple terms? Maybe you have a template for that we can share with everyone, but in general, what are the main components there?
Sure. So happy to share a template. What I've found over the years, I've presented the scorecard over the years at places like Mind the Product, where I've keynotes, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Having a scorecard and sharing it, which again, happy to do, isn't as important as knowing what goes behind it and knowing how to implement it. So let's just talk about that. So like if I, being the self-processed tooling geek that I am, if this was a tool, the way I'd look at it is there's two components, right? One is, and this is something you see a little bit more often, and this needs to be done first, is you kind of need a product runbook. And by product runbook, I mean, just like an engineering team may have a runbook for doing certain things, and other orgs will have them in your organization, in your company. It's something that kind of goes, what are our beliefs as a product organization? And this is whether your CPO, your product directors, whoever ideally the entire product team will get together, but depending on the size of the product team, will get together and they'll write out what is our product runbook. And essentially this means, what is our vision? What is our strategy as a product team? Like, what do we believe in? Maybe we believe in safe spaces, which is something I'm always very cynical about, because I feel if you have to say it, you probably don't. But regardless, that could be a belief of yours. It could be we're data-led, we're data-driven, we're product-led, whatever it is that is relevant to your organization. And I don't want to overgeneralize. I've been at companies where I said something like, hey, we should be product-led, and then engineering and technology got super upset. So it's relevant. Each company needs to go through this exercise, and it literally is an exercise where it needs to be workshopped. Whether you do it through a Miro board, you need to workshop, what is our product runbook, which means as a product org, what do we believe in, what are our principles, etc. And that needs to be documented. Now, a lot of companies do that, and the problem is they get stuck there. They kind of go, hey, this is what it is. We're going to socialize it. We're going to get maybe leadership to come in and give a presentation. We'll talk about this is what we believe in. Leadership, if they kind of get off their phone long enough, it's like, okay, great, cool, got it, fantastic. What do I do with this? And this is where the scorecard comes in, because the scorecard needs to be, what is it that we identified in our organization that is really important? So depending on your org, that'll be different. So for example, if you're creating internal products, if you're creating external products, B2B, B2C, there'll be different components, right? And maybe we do a lot of sales collateral, a lot of go-to-market, or maybe we do absolutely no go-to-market because we're an internal product, but we need to do a lot of presentations, right? So you'll go through and work out what are the inputs that make up your product org. And usually that comes down into probably 3 or 4 main buckets. And each of these buckets I like to see as competencies. It's like, what should we be competent in as an organization? And the first one is usually something around data. So it should be data around, like, are we data driven? Are we data led? Is there a difference in those two words? I've been in meetings where I've spent like over 2 hours just arguing the word, and it's like, hang on a second, let's cut this discussion. Let's actually start implementing it. We can start discussing some definitions down the line, but let's get going. And so the first competence is usually data. And then what you will do with that, and I'll just stick with this as a competence for now, is what I'll usually do with that is I'll then try to work out what are the metrics that make up good data. Like if we're saying we're being data-led or data-driven, what does that actually mean? What are the metrics that we can add for it? It could be things like we have product analytics, a tool like Amplitude, for example, right? Mm-hmm. It could be we have Amplitude implemented. You know, you can get down to the level and you can kind of say, like on a score of 1 to 10, if having Amplitude implemented, we're busy using it regularly, we use it at least, let's say, every 2 weeks to research it, and we make decisions based on that, we can give ourselves maybe like a 6 out of 10, right? And that would be one of the inputs. And another input could be things like, what are we doing around customers? Like, where's the voice of the customer? Do we actually talk to customers? Everybody will tell you they do, but it's then, again, let's put a metric together. If we're going to give ourselves a score out of 10, what does talking to customers really mean? Does it mean if we're a B2C app that we do NPS surveys or other types of surveys that may be more relevant? And then literally going through that, and then there'll be other things that also are the inputs that make up a product team, for example, like our engineering partners, right? Where are we with that? And a fourth one potentially could be, where are we with our business partners? How do we respond to them? Or where are we with road mapping? So you can go through them, you can go through and create basically an inventory, which should be informed by your product runbook that I spoke about. And based on that inventory, you'll probably have 4 or 5 main competencies, and there may be a few sub-competencies out of that. I'd recommend you don't do more than 10. More than 10 starts to become a bit unwieldy. And let's say that you did give yourself a score out of 10 for each of those competencies. You should end up then with a score out of 100, which gives you very conveniently a percentile, and you can add them all up and kind of go, great. Let's say every individual on their team has scored themselves out of 10, and then we can cascade that up and see where we are as a team, and we can see, hey, we're at 64%, and then we can look at that and go, okay, great. In the next quarter, what are we going to be focusing on? And let's just say we're going to, for the sake of this example, we're going to focus on road mapping. We feel that our communication of road mapping isn't great. Currently, we're only getting ourselves a 4 out of 10. To get to a 6 out of 10, we need to do X, Y, and Z. This is what we're going to be doing as a team in the next quarter. Now, if I can just go back to the first example of the problem that it solves with your leadership team, when you're a product leader and you're now presenting the scorecard to your product leadership team, you've given them a presentation, explain how it's going to work, and then you tell them this is what's going to happen, and you get it on the agenda, which is super, super important. Say, hey, we were 64%. Our target for the next quarter is to say go to 78%. What you're actually doing without having told the people what you're doing is you've actually educated them on a lot of the inputs on what makes a really good product team. I hope you've noted that none of those inputs or competencies that I added was around delivery. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that really helps educate your leadership team and your business partners, whoever else it is. This is how, as a product team, we're going to be more successful, because this is how we're going to get better on all the competencies that make us a better product team.
That's really interesting. And there is a few things over there that we could unpack a bit more. Just to start with, one of the challenges I've seen in the past is, in order to even get to a product runbook, you have to have a company culture. And most companies, or a lot of enterprise companies, don't even have a defined culture. They kind of have a culture that was built over time from just whatever happened, or the people that came in, and they kind of like enforce their culture, whatever they knew from before, and things like that. And when a company doesn't have that by design culture, it's I found it anyway, it's very hard to even define what is your product culture, and from that, how do you even define a product runbook? So it seems like you have to start with, almost even before that, understand who we are as a company, what do we value, how do we work together, etc. And from that, how can you come up to and apply that to your products, and to, you know, how do we build products? What are the what do we value when we work together to build a product, and what do we value when we create products and stuff like that? And then you can define that scorecard. Is that right?
I think in theory that's right. Just like, you know, in theory communism works, right? I think in reality, and this is from someone who I used to be the head of product at the world's largest employee engagement firm, and everything was about culture. Like everything was wall-to-wall culture. And I remember reading a fantastic book, which I totally recommend that every single product manager reads, by Safi Bakor. And it's called Loon Shots. And one of the things he talks in there is, he's a very successful entrepreneur. Time after time, he's done fantastically well. But one of the things that he says is that, what's it saying? That culture eats, can't remember, it's culture eats something for lunch. What Safi says, which I really like, is because it's very, very contentious, is structure eats culture. So it's like culture's great, but it's what is the structure underneath the culture, because that will eat your culture. And really what he's saying is, what people talk about when they talk about cultures, they don't talk so much about incentives that people have in their jobs. And he's kind of saying, in a company of 10 people, and I'm hopefully not going to totally misquote him, but in a company of 10 people, the way that you'll get ahead, structurally speaking, is, or career-wise, is, you're 10% of the company. So, but you're all in, you're going to help the company grow, and you're going to advance as the company advances, and hopefully you've got this, a decent amount of equity, you're going to help the company grow, and it's going to help you as well. In a company of 1,000 people, you're obviously like 1,000th of that company. And Safi's view is the way that you'll get ahead in your career is, you'll go ahead with all the cultural stuff, whether it's there or whether it's lacking. But really what he's saying is, if you want to get ahead in your career, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be making sure that the people who can impact your life, your livelihood, that you look really, really good in front of them. So you're going to be impacting your managers, and your very close peer group. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I'm saying that that's the structure that I think eats culture. And so I guess really what I'm saying isn't whether you're right or wrong, or whether it works in theory. It's in reality, if a company hasn't really gotten to a point where they've put down, let's say, all their leadership principles and done that in created the book by Daniel Coyle, the Culture Code. If they haven't encoded their culture, what it's going to be, that culture is just going to default back to what human nature is, which is, I need to get ahead. How am I going to get ahead? Who do I need to influence to get ahead? And I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that's my rather contentious view of how things work in enterprises. Like in the void of something better, it's going to just default back to human nature.
It's an interesting point, because it is definitely a very hard thing to achieve. We did spoke in the past. We had an episode with Gustavo Razzetti about cultural, organizational culture. He's an expert in that. And our perspective was all about how do we create a product culture from that. But it is definitely, in some organization, an uphill battle, which is hard to achieve. Now, another thought that I have is about general product competencies. We did talk also in another episode, I think it was episode maybe 77, with Ravi Mehta, about his product competency toolkit. And over there, he has that toolkit that has generic product management competencies, but the scorecard, the success scorecard, is more geared towards competencies that are required in order to achieve the product run book of the organization, right? So it's not a generic one, or maybe it does apply some of the generic one, but it is a bit more specific to what this organization is all about, right?
100%. Like, and I don't think, and this is why I sometimes resist like sharing the scorecard where again, I'll give a talk at a conference, and I'll get, I don't know, a couple of dozen people reaching out for the scorecard. Like, but the scorecard is like, I could give you the how Apple manages their business, and I could give you like, it's just not going to be useful.
Like you're saying, between different companies are going to attack the scorecard creation differently because of the nature of the company itself.
100%. Look, I think there's like 3 or 4 things that are across any product, or there's going to be data at some level. There's going to be communications, whether that's roadmap, socialization, voice of the customer, etc. And then there's going to be prioritization. How are you doing that, right? And you can break that down to get into multiple key subcomponents. And then lastly, it's usually like your engineering, your business partnership. Now, within those 4 competencies, you can probably create enough sub-competencies to be able to cover your specific organization. The way I've seen it really work is, I've seen orgs, just to go to that previous point, Moshe, is, I've seen orgs that have really like weak, according to me, weak cultures, just generally cultures. And yet products have created their own culture, which is their own product culture, because again, in the lieu of something better, humans, I think, will just default to doing the best that they can do. And they'll create their own culture by default. And then they'll work up like, what are the competencies. And I've seen product teams use scorecards to really, really help. Because again, if you go back to the problem that it solves, it's not trying to solve the culture problem. It's not trying to say, hey, what are our leadership principles? What do we believe in? What do we do when nobody's watching? All that kind of good stuff that culture should be showing us. It's what do we very clearly, in the absence of culture or within it, what are our competencies as a product team? And once we've documented this and workshopped it and documented it and shared it with the leadership team, then it becomes a living document, because most people tend to get to the point of we've created this playbook, if they even get there. Most companies don't get there. But even if they get to the point that we've created our run book, sorry, I said playbook, but if they've created their run book, it's a question of that's fantastic. And then it becomes another document that you probably can't find in Miro somewhere, but it kind of just gets lost. And here, what the scorecard is meant to solve, again, is that kind of going, if it can be measured, it can be managed. But we need measurements. We need some type of objectivity and some type of scoring that can get us there. And I just want to be really clear on that. It's the team scorecard. It's not the product scorecard. It's like, where the product will have KPIs or OKRs specifically around this. This is specific around the team. Does that make sense?
So how the team itself is performing, like in terms of being a strong product team, and then you can convey that to executives, like this is how we're actually doing. Okay.
100%. And by osmosis, what I've seen is when orgs do this quarter over quarter, which tends to be like the frequency and the pace at which it should be updated to the leadership team. I've seen that after 2 or 3 of these quarters of these happening, the leadership team, by osmosis in my mind, but really by kind of education, they start understanding what product is. Because you kind of, when a leadership team needs to prepare for a quarterly meeting, there will be documents that will be prepared and shared in advance. And so they'll have a look at that usually. Not every org does that, of course, but they'll have a look at it and they'll go, okay, great. So where's the voice of the customer? And they go, oh, cool, voice of the customer is going to get spoken about. And you see, once you've seen that a few times, they understand, okay, the inputs are voice of the customer, prioritization, engineering partnership, data, whatever. And so, okay, that makes perfect sense. Whereas if you've gone to them like a month or 2 before, and if you had the, I don't know, the temerity of wit to do this, and you went to say, hey, what makes up product? They'll be like, I don't know, I'm busy. It's just get the product out, whatever, right? And it also makes, it does improve that cultural or company enterprise relationship between the different organizations in it, because a lot of the time, engineering's been around for quite a while, and you can say what makes up for a good engineering team, and usually your CTO can define that for you pretty quickly and clearly, whether he's right or wrong or she's right or wrong, they can do that. Whereas product, people are kind of, well, I don't know, what is that? Like I said, in that organization, which again was the world's largest market research firm, and they still couldn't define, like, hey, how do I measure where the product is successful or not?
If you could evangelize it in product, it could really like expand out throughout the other teams.
Well, the amazing thing there, I'm so glad you raised that, Matt. It's a really great perception. The interesting thing, though, for me, is that most of the other teams have some kind of scorecard.
Okay.
So if you look at your sales team, they've absolutely got a scorecard in Salesforce. If you look at the reporting in Salesforce, they'll tell you exactly where
for them,
everybody
it's much
is.
easier to measure, how
right.
what does it mean to be successful for them, if it's number of leads or number of sales or bottom line dollars, right? So it's so much easier than product management.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think I came at it from the other perspective. I was coming at it from, hey, how come all my other partners have got these great scorecards and ways of measuring, and yet my org doesn't, and yet my org and my colleagues and my peers are out there whinging about, work in a feature factory, we got to do product ops, and product leadership doesn't take us seriously, or the other leaders don't take us seriously. And it's like, well, provide them what they need. Like, How would you take sales seriously if imagine a sales manager came every quarterly to a leadership meeting, go, how's sales doing? Well, we didn't quite hit it, but it's okay. We'll get it next time, maybe. Right? You'd laugh them out the room, and you go, that's not how sales all work. But with product, they'd be like, oh, how's product going? Yeah, we're doing okay. We kind of didn't quite hit our targets. We didn't meet it, but trust me, we'll do it next time. We're getting better. We've hired another thing. We're going to try something in product ops. It just doesn't work, man.
This is great. I'm really glad that you also mentioned the difference between this and the product success. So this is not the OKRs or the KPI for the product itself. It's not like retention or churn or any of these. It's actually for the team itself. So it's very important to distinguish between the two. And also that, there is definitely a big need for that. Like we said, it's because it's so hard to measure product. I've been in situations that people ask me, why do we even need you? And I'm like, why do I have to prove myself all the time? So if I had something like that, I think it would have been much easier. How hard do you find it, or easy do you find it to convince the C-suite that they need something like that, or that leadership?
Let me just respond to what you said there. How do I know I need you? It's, what they're really saying, at least the way I hear that, is people are kind of begging and saying, please educate me in what you do. Because again, if you go back to the product thing, let's say that you hit all your product OKRs, right? Let's say you hit every single one of your products or things. That doesn't mean your product as a team are doing really well. For example, there may have been no data. There may have been no voice of the customer. It could have just been, hey, we defined product is going to release 3 new features this quarter. They released 3 new features. What a fantastic product org. Or it could be the other way around. The product team totally missed those 3 features, and yet their communication was on point. They were doing the right things. They were talking to the customers. They were prioritizing things accurately. So it's like, if you're just measuring, again, back to on that delivery side, you miss the whole other side. So I think your question, after my little tangent there, your question was really around how do you get people to kind of want to buy into product? Is that what you're asking?
Well, to buy into even using the scorecard, to get, well, yes, I mean, to buy into product, that's a very big question. But let's say they bought into product, but they still do it, the way that, or they don't do it. they do the way they think they do it, that everyone is doing it, but they don't really do much. And then they're kind of like, let's do it in a different way that will actually make much more sense. And one of those tools is the product team success scorecard.
Yeah. So to me, I think all change happens when a human being hits enough pain. Okay. People give up smoking where they realize that they're about to have a kid, and if they don't give up smoking, there's going to be pain for the kid or whatever. And I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, so feel absolutely free to ignore that analogy. But I think it works the same in the product org, right? If you're a product leader and people are resigning and going somewhere else because they feel like they work in a feature factory, if you're a product leader and you're just sick of your CTO saying to you, just give me the stories, just give us more stuff to do, you're not doing it properly. And people, like, if someone came to me and said, like, well, hey, why do I need you? I'd be like, okay, that gives me quite a bit of pain, because I'm like, am I going to lose my job? Depending who asked me that question, right? I could say there's potential pain down the line. So again, if you've got those two pain points or problems of, my peers don't get what I'm doing and I'm frustrated and I want to communicate this to them, and also I want to build up the culture and I want to build up the structure in my product team. I want to attract talent, keep talent, and get talent engaged, because this says, it's not just one of those kind of, it's a job descriptions like, hey, you own the product, you do this, you do that, whatever. It's like literally what you're doing, and you're part of the team that is getting cascaded up to the leadership team and communicated to them on a quarterly basis. If I can describe that to you as a product leader, that is what I'm saying is 100% accurate, obviously on the assumption that happens, as opposed to these kind of hand-wavy, wafty type of, well, we own it and I don't want to say the CEOs of the product, because it just makes me upset whenever I hear somebody say that.
Yes,
but it's like, it's I never said that, but it's it's when you're in an interview and you're dealing with your team and look, as a product leader, part of what you have to do is you have to attract and retain really great talent. And that is a pain point for most product leaders. And this is something that helps solve as well. Because it's like, if you're a mid-level, let's say senior PM, or and you wanted to join an org, and the one was like, yeah, well, and one of the questions you asked in the interview, like, how does the C-suite buy into product? And well, they kind of get it, they kind of don't, we're working on it and we're trying to do that, as opposed to, hey, we use a product team success scorecard, we're currently at 64%, we want to get to 68%, the next quarter we focused on roadmaps, this is what we're doing around that. Which of those two orgs do you want to join, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
On the assumption everything else is equal.
Absolutely. That's great.
I was even thinking you could tie the scorecard to other teams in the company, because ultimately, like, how are we impacting revenue for the company, and how are we helping drive that as a product team? And then you could say, like, hey, our scores are going up, and you can see a correlation with possibly sales going up, CS and implementation, and so maybe there's some correlation between them and driving the revenue up. So.
Well, there is, and especially when I was talking about the competencies, one of the competencies is how are we doing with our engineering or our business partners, right?
Yeah.
And part of what those inputs should go into that, if you've workshopped your inputs, you should realize that we need to be communicating with engineering or business, or communicating, how we're doing it. And in addition, not just in the C-suite, leadership should say how the scorecard goes, but when your engineering or business colleagues know that this goes into your scorecard, what I've seen in orgs that are medium and large, everybody else now wants to know what the scorecard is, because they know that leadership are seeing it. And, it's like, I would, if let's say my engineering partners were telling me they've got a CTO scorecard and blah, 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 I'd be like, awesome, I want to see that, right? And then, so 100%. And the correlation as well, I think works positively, because you'll say, hey, we believe our engineering relationship competency has improved this quarter, this is what we did. And they'll be like, yeah, absolutely. So they'll be brought along on the ride, on the journey, as product gets better and better.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really interesting discussion, Ross, and thank you so much. I really, I like working mostly with startups, but I've been in these situations and I see how it is a big need for many organizations. I've been in recently consulting to a company that all their product managers were really SMEs. They were not really product managers. They didn't know how to do product managers. And they didn't really have this maturity of product organization. So if they would have just go through the exercise of building something like that, I think they would have learned so much more, and maybe even overall their feature factory. But that's a discussion for another a whole episode, even more. Matt, do you have any other questions?
Is there perhaps a tool, since, product for product, is there a preferred tool that you like to do these kind of things with? Like, if a product team is starting out and they're like, hey, let's try to do the scorecard, is it Miro or something like that you typically use?
I like to start off with kind of just like, hey, here's a PDF, download it, these are the inputs, let's get a score. And then very quickly moving into something like an Airtable database super quickly. Because it needs to be measured, outputs should be visualized. And I don't think Miro is the right place for it, to be honest.
Right.
Because it's less about, it's more of a kind of a mathematical, here are the inputs, and let's measure that, and then let's measure that over time. And also, we want to be able to cascade from, let's say, individuals on the team, and I've seen some orgs which are like, let's just take out the individual's name and let's just cascade it up into an overall number. Other people like to say, hey, this is where all we are, where all the individuals are. It doesn't really matter. But I've seen Airtable databases and similar things like that, like kind of no code or no code, work really well, where you can calculate it over time, as it's suggested, on a quarterly basis, and then do basic visualizations around that. So it's not really a mathematical let's say algorithm, but there's a component of it that is. So
there is,
I think with things like tools like that, Miro doesn't necessarily is the right tool. But yeah, Airtable's great for that. Airtable's databases that you can structure and have, like here's the one basic inputs on the team, and then how it cascades up, and then how we can visualize it. And then again, when you are putting it on a quarterly basis. So yeah, so look, I'm happy to share, if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share just kind of like a scorecard basics, like here are all the inputs that go into a scorecard. But again, I'm happy to share that on the caveat that the scorecard without having done multiple workshops to get you to what it really is in a different organization isn't that useful. But again, happy to share it just because, again, I'll be keynoting another conference in a couple of months and people will reach out and I've always have something, hey, I want to give it to you. I'd rather share something than nothing. But it really comes down to building it yourself. And I think as product managers, I've seen people reach out to me when they're building it. They're like, I love this. This is so cool. This gives us our own thing. And it's amazing seeing a company go from, oh my God, I was working in a feature factory and oh my God, my peers don't understand me, to this is awesome. And if my peers don't understand me, that's on them. Okay. And if they think it's a feature factory, that's on them. That's not on us anymore. And totally change that, Moshe, as you said, that kind of product culture.
Yeah.
Cool. Appreciate that. Yeah. And you mentioned Airtable. So I know that's something Moshe and I have used in our work. And so I don't think we've talked about that on the show. That's cool to hear about Airtable, and maybe it's something to talk about down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Airtable's great.
Yeah, yep. and who knows? I mean, maybe one day you will productize it into its own product and create something,
maybe
something
I will,
right? So when you do, come back and tell us about it.
Yes.
But in the meantime, we could put links to whatever templates and talks you have, with, of course, that caveat. And we should mention that in the comments as well, just in case people are not listening to this, that you have to do the work. It's not a magic bullet. You have to do the work to put it in there. You have to do it based on your organization. So it's not, one fit all. It's just you have to go through the process to make it work. But when you do, then magic happens, right?
Oh, right. Amazing. It's like the organizations that I've worked with that have done it, it's always been very, very transforming.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ross, for joining us. Where can people reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm super active on LinkedIn. Just look for me. It's Ross Webb, ROSSWEBB. Super simple. I always post links there. I've got my own podcast, which is Product Team Success, which I can, if people can feel free to reach out. Henry's going to be joining me there for the next season, which is great. So if you're
excellent.
Henry Latham fan,
check
us out.
And we should come and help you as well if you want us on the show.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. We've been talking about that for too long, guys.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
You know what we can talk about? We are geeking about tools, right?
Yes.
Geeking about tools, yeah. The tool geeks, man. But so yeah, let's do that. I'd love to do that. But yeah, if anybody wants to hit me up on LinkedIn or just just reach out anytime. I'm happy to chat about this.
Perfect. Thank you
so
much.
Thanks again, Ross. Really appreciate this. Thanks, Moshe. Thank you to all the listeners, and we'll talk to you next time.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate the feedback and support. Please leave us a review to help others find the show on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else you're listening to the show.